The silence was never emptiness. It was not cold indifference, not the absence of love. That silence carried weight. It carried confusion, conflict, and a depth of feeling that they couldn't name, let alone explain. When someone with an avoidant attachment style pulls away, it often feels like a door being slammed shut. The one left behind stands there, questioning everything. What went wrong? Why it all changed? How someone who once seemed so present could vanish without a trace? But the truth is, their silence isn't a void. It's the sound of emotional overload. It's not nothingness. It's too much. They didn't disappear because you were unlovable. They disappeared because love, real love, terrified them. In that silence, there was a war inside them, between the pull toward intimacy and the instinct to self-protect, between the deep longing to stay and the primal fear of being known. When things got too close, too vulnerable, too raw, they pulled away not because you were wrong for them, but because you were right in ways that unearthed every old wound they thought they had buried. Your presence awakened a part of them they weren't ready to confront. Silence becomes their shield. It's the only way they know to gain control over feelings that make them feel exposed. When they don't speak, when they don't explain, when they vanish, it's not because they don't have anything to say. It's because their words can't untangle the chaos inside them. The more they care, the more risk they feel. The closer they get to someone who matters, the more their old programming screams at them to retreat, so they run. Not because they want to hurt you, but because in their mind, getting close means getting hurt. In that silence, they may appear calm. To you, it may seem like they've moved on effortlessly, but the truth is they're not at peace. They're wrestling with emotions they've spent their entire life trying to avoid. Their thoughts don't leave you. The silence is loud for them too. It echoes with things left unsaid, with regrets they don't know how to name, with feelings that scare them because they're real. And real is dangerous to someone who's spent a lifetime surviving by detachment. They don't miss you like others might. They don't post by to talk about it or reach out impulsively. They bury it. They deny it. But the missing is there, quiet, persistent, buried under layers of logic and distraction. Their avoidance is a mask, not a lack of care. The feelings are still there. They're just hiding from them, hoping distance will dilute them. But it never does. The longer they stay silent, the heavier the truth becomes. And yet, even in silence, love finds a way to survive, because love that's genuine, even when unspoken, lingers. It stays in the room after they've left. It shows up in memories that won't fade. It presses against their chest at night when they try to sleep. And that's why the silence matters, because if they truly didn't care, there'd be no hesitation, no need for distance, no emotional weight to carry. But there is. Their silence is not the absence of feeling. It's the overflow. They didn't know how to stay, not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't know how love for them meant risk. Intimacy felt like exposure. And the closer they got to you, the more unsafe it felt, even if you were never the threat. In your presence, their guard dropped, the control slipped. And that scared them more than they could say. So they retreated into the only safety they've ever known, silence. But the silence is not the end. It's not a period, it's a pause. A space where truth simmers beneath fear. A place where love waits, misunderstood but gone. If they come back, it's because that silence forced them to face what words couldn't. And if they don't, know that their leaving was never about your worth. It was about their wound, one that still doesn't know how to love without fear. Distance wasn't their decision the way you might think. It didn't come from logic, clarity, or choice. It came from survival. It came from old wiring in their nervous system that associates closeness with danger. When you reached out, when you offered consistency, care, and presence, it wasn't rejection they felt. It was threat. Not because you were dangerous, but because love that stays is unfamiliar. Love that sees them is overwhelming. Love that wants to get close. Truly coactivates every old fear they've never been taught how to sit with. So they didn't choose distance as a strategy. It chose them long before you arrived. When they started to pull away, it likely felt sudden. One day they were present, laughing with you, sharing little moments, letting you in piece by piece. And then slowly, or maybe all at once, they shifted. Conversations dried up. Eye contact became rare. Vulnerability disappeared. But the shift wasn't about you. The shift was them reaching their limit, not of love, but a capacity. Avoidance don't stop loving when things get real. They stop feeling safe. Real connection feels like unfamiliar territory, and unfamiliarity equals risk. So they retreat, not because they want to lose you, but because they want to stop the intensity inside them that they don't know how to hold. Their body, their mind, their entire sense of self has been trained to believe that closeness equals loss. Maybe it was a parent who was present one moment and gone the next. Maybe it was love that came with strings, judgment, or punishment. Whatever it was, it shaped their inner world into one where love feels conditional, unstable, or suffocating. So when someone like you shows up, steady, kind, emotionally available, they don't know how to stay grounded in that presence. They interpret that emotional closeness as an alarm. The closer they get, the louder the alarm rings. And the only way they know to silence it is to run. Their leaving doesn't mean you didn't matter. In fact, it often means you did. People who barely scratch the surface don't trigger the flight response. But someone who sees past the walls, someone who offers the kind of love they've only known in theory, that's what unsettles them the most. It touches the most guarded parts, the parts they protect not out of cruelty, but out of fear. So they distance themselves not to punish you, but to preserve their own illusion of control. Because control to them and feels safer than connection, and safety is their highest priority. But even as they distance themselves, something in them watches. Something stays aware. Because while distance brings short-term relief, it also brings a slow age. They may feel more in control, but they don't feel whole. They may feel protected, but they don't feel fulfilled. The absence of you creates quiet discomfort. It reminds them that safety without intimacy is loneliness. That protection without connection is hollow. And over time, that realization starts to stir something in them they didn't want to face, and they didn't really want to be alone. They just didn't know how to be close. People often misunderstand avoidance, assuming their distance is indifference, that their retreat is coldness. But their fear isn't about not feeling. It's about feeling too much, too fast, and too deeply. It's about being afraid of losing themselves in another person. They fear dependence because they associate it with pain. So when you offered closeness, what they saw, through no fault of yours, was the beginning of another wound. And instead of risking it, they chose the wound they already knew: isolation. The tragedy is they don't explain this. They rarely say, I'm pulling away because I'm terrified. Instead, they become cold, detached, vague. They leave without clarity. They mask their fear with indifference, because to admit their struggle would be to drop the armor, and that armor has been their only source of safety for years. That armor told they'd never be hurt again. Spending someone in, especially someone like you, would mean taking it off. That's not a simple decision. It's an identity shift. And so the distance grows, not because love has disappeared, because fear has taken the wheel. That fear is loud. It tells them they'll lose themselves. They get too close, that you'll leave anyway, so they might as well leave first. That if they let you love them fully, the ground will give out beneath them. These aren't rational thoughts. They're old beliefs wrapped in emotional truth. But those beliefs run the show. They drive the behavior, the withdrawal, the inconsistency. Eventually, though, the silence becomes a mirror. It forces them to confront what they couldn't face while you were close. They begin to feel the difference between being safe and being alive. They remember the way your presence calmed the chaos, even if it scared them. They think back to your steadiness, your care, and realize that what once felt threatening now feels like loss, that the space they created to feel free now feels empty. And in that stillness, something inside them softens, not all at once, but slowly. A recognition begins to take root. The distance didn't bring peace. It only delayed the truth. And that truth is simple. They didn't want to leave you. They just didn't know how to stay. They come back because the connection was real, not convenient, not something they could replace with noise or distraction. When someone returns after silence, especially someone with avoidant tendencies, it isn't random. It isn't a matter of boredom or loneliness or curiosity. It's because something deep within them still holds on to what was shared, no matter how long they've been gone or how distant they seem to be. It means the impact you made didn't fade with time. It means your presence left a mark, not just on their mind, but on their nervous system, their emotional memory, the core of who they are. Connection doesn't lie. No matter how much they try to suppress it, avoid it, distract themselves, or convince themselves that it was better to be alone, the truth stayed. Real connection doesn't dissolve just because someone walks away. It follows them, quietly but persistently, the way they wake up thinking of your laugh, in the way they replay conversations in their mind, in the stillness of their days when no one else brings that same comfort or challenge, that same peace or spark. Real connection roots itself in the soul, not the surface. And when something is real, it echoes, even in absence. They likely didn't expect it to echo the way it did. Many avoidants believe that creating distance will restore control, that they can reset themselves, get back their calm, logical selves once the emotions are pushed away. But what they underestimate is the emotional residue of someone who truly sees them. When someone has seen behind their defenses, accepted their shadows, and stayed steady without needing to fix or pressure, it's unforgettable, it's rare. And that rarity becomes undeniable once it's gone. They may have tried to replace the connection. They may have filled the silence with casual conversations, temporary companionship, surface level distractions, but no one reached them the way you did. No one made them feel the way they felt when they were with you. Safe, alive, terrified, drawn and seen, and slowly that contrast becomes unavoidable. The conversations they have feel emptier. The emotions they experience feel less vibrant, because when something real has lived in your heart, nothing half-hearted can fill its place. They return because your presence revealed something they didn't know they were searching for, something their defenses couldn't hide forever. They also return because they know, consciously or not, that they weren't fair to you, that they left you with silence instead of closure, that they disappeared without giving you the truth, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how to say what they were feeling. That guilt lives in them, even if they never show it. They may not know how to apologize directly, but the act of coming back is often their way of saying, you mattered more than I could admit. Because if the connection wasn't real, they would have stayed gone. They wouldn't risk facing you again if they didn't feel something powerful still lived between you. Time away gives clarity. It gives space for truth to rise to the surface, especially in people who are used to avoiding it. It shows them the difference between attachment and distraction, between connection and convenience. When they come back, it's because something inside of them realized what they had with you wasn't ordinary. It challenged them, opened them, made them question who they are and what they're capable of feeling. And those kinds of connections don't come around often. So they return, not out of habit, not because you were always available, but because the bond was real, and real doesn't disappear because someone got scared. Even in their absence, they never stopped remembering. You were the memory that lingered not as a wound, but as a presence. Not because you chased them, but because you represented something their heart couldn't shake. Their body might have left, but something about you stayed lodged in their spirit, your kindness, your patience, your energy. The feeling of being known without pressure, accepted without condition, that kind of connection haunts avoidance in the best and worst ways because it disrupts everything they thought they had to do to stay safe. And when the silence becomes too heavy, when the emptiness starts to outweigh the fear, they come back. They come back because they finally realize it wasn't just about you showing up. It was about how they felt in your presence. Less guarded, more human, more whole. They come back not because it's easy, but because you're not replaceable. And deep down, no matter how they try to bury it, they know that this isn't about fairy tales or fantasies. It's about the undeniable weight of real connection. And if they return, it means they finally stopped running from it. It means they've realized that what you wasn't just a chapter, it was a turning point. Something that asked them to grow, to feel, to stop pretending they didn't want love. They come back because what you gave them wasn't temporary, it was truth. And truth always finds its way home. When they come back, it's not an accident. It's not something done lightly or without internal struggle. For some of the avoidant tendencies to return, something within them had to shift. Something they could no longer ignore, suppress, or outrun. Avoidants don't return out of habit. They return because something inside of them finally confronted the very thing they've spent most of their lives avoiding: emotional truth. Their reappearance is rarely impulsive. It's not just a moment of weakness. It's a product of inner growth, of reckoning, of finally facing the mirror they tried to break when they walked away. People often think avoidants don't change, that they live in a cycle of running, shutting down, disconnecting, and never coming back. And for many, that's true. Some never break the pattern. But when one does, when they re-enter your life, it means the silence changed them. It means something cracked. Maybe the silence they thought would bring them peace only brought more confusion. Maybe the solitude they believed would free them only made them feel more imprisoned. Either way, growth happened. Not in loud, dramatic ways, but in quiet, personal, internal battles no one else saw. Their return is evidence that the emotional armor began to rust, that what they pushed down refused to stay buried, that the comfort of avoidance no longer outweighed the pain of absence. People don't return to situations that feel threatening unless something inside them becomes stronger than the fear. For them to come back, they had to feel everything they once numbed. They had to revisit the emotions they tried to delete. They had to sit with the truth that leaving you didn't resolve what they felt. It only delayed it. And that delay turned into discomfort, then reflection, and eventually awakening. Avoidants often move through life with the belief that no one will ever fully understand them. That love always comes with conditions. That vulnerability always leads to disappointment. But sometimes someone shows up and offers something different. You, someone who doesn't force or demand, who sees through the defensive layers without trying to tear them down. Someone who simply holds space and allows them to be real. At first, they run from it. That kind of love feels unsafe because it's unfamiliar. But with time and space, they begin to see it for what it truly was: rare, disarming, honest. And it becomes the benchmark against which everything else is measured. In the silence, they compare. They remember how they felt with you, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. They remember the steadiness of your presence, the softness of your words, the way you didn't try to fix them, but simply stayed when others would have walked. That memory lingers in a way others don't. It's not nostalgia, it's recognition. And as that recognition grows, so does the discomfort with their own behavior. They begin to question why they left, why they couldn't stay, and more importantly, why your absence echoes louder than the presence of anyone else. Their growth doesn't mean they become perfect. It doesn't mean they've mastered communication or conquered every fear. But it does mean they've begun to see the pattern, to notice their own defenses, to recognize the moments where fear made decisions that love should have guided. Coming back is their way of saying, even without words, I see it now. It's not always a grand apology or a neatly packaged return. Sometimes it's awkward, hesitant, full of uncertainty, but it's also full of courage. Because for someone who's built their life around detachment, the choice to reattach is monumental. And growth like that doesn't happen without pain. Their return is often marked by internal discomfort, the realization that they hurt someone they cared about, the awareness that silence was easier than truth, the humility it takes to re-enter a space where they once caused distance. That discomfort becomes their teacher. It's what turns avoidance into reflection. It's what allows the heart, so long protected, to finally crack open just enough to let light in. And that light is what brings them back. You may never hear the full story of what happened during their silence. They may never find the perfect words to explain why they left or why it took them so long to come back. But their return itself is the explanation. It's the embodiment of a truth they couldn't say before. It says something inside me has shifted. I see now what I didn't have the tools to see before. I feel now what I didn't have the courage to feel before. I left because I was scared, and I'm back because I'm growing. This kind of growth is not always linear. It doesn't mean they won't still struggle with closeness, but it does mean they've crossed a threshold, one where they're no longer content running from what they truly want, one where they're willing to take the risk because they become fearless. But because the regret of not trying weighs heavier than the fear of trying and failing, when they come back, it isn't to reclaim what they lost. It's to honor what they finally realized was real. They return not as the same person, but as someone who has looked their own fear in the eye and decided that love is worth facing it. And that decision, that moment of return, is their quiet declaration, I'm growing. I see the truth. And somehow, despite everything, I still choose you. You were the exception. Not because you tried harder, not because you loved louder, not because you were perfect, but because you reached a place in them that most people never even got close to. Avoidants live in a carefully managed emotional world, a world built on control, distance, and predictability. They've learned through experience or survival that the less they feel, the safer they are. That keeping people at arm's length is easier than explaining the chaos inside. But then you came along and something shifted. You didn't break through their walls with force. You simply stayed. You didn't demand entry. You offered safety. And that changed everything. Most people don't stay in an avoidance emotional memory. That's the painful truth. They may have relationships, interactions, even moments of affection, but very few leave a lasting mark. Most people remain on the surface exactly where it feels safe. But you went deeper. You saw things they weren't used to showing. You heard the silence between their words. You noticed the flinch when things got too close, but you didn't turn away. That kind of presence doesn't fade. That kind of connection becomes etched into their nervous system. And when someone touches that deeply, they become unforgettable, not in a romanticized way, but in a grounded, undeniable way. You became the exception because you didn't play by the rules they were used to. You didn't respond to their distance with anger or desperation. You responded with understanding. You didn't chase them, but you didn't give up either. That energy, patient but grounded, created a space they'd never experienced before. A space where they didn't have to perform or protect, where they could simply be. Even if they didn't know how to accept it at the time, they felt it. And that feeling lingers no matter how far they try to run. You also reflected back a version of themselves they weren't ready to face. You saw their softness beneath the armor. You saw the fear behind their withdrawal. You made it impossible for them to pretend they didn't care because your presence mirrored back everything they were trying to hide from. That kind of reflection is powerful, but it's also terrifying. It's one thing to avoid other people. It's another to be seen so clearly that you can no longer avoid yourself. You didn't just love them. You exposed them to the possibility that they were capable of more, that they were worthy of more. And that revelation doesn't fade with time. They likely didn't thank you for this. They may not have acknowledged it at all. In fact, it probably felt like they punished you for loving them. But the truth is, they were never punishing you. They were panicking. Because when someone becomes the exception to their emotional rules, it shatters the illusion of safety that distance once gave them. You weren't supposed to matter this much. You weren't supposed to stay in their mind long after they left. You weren't supposed to make them question every belief they held about love, intimacy, and trust. But you did, and that's why they remember. Even after they walked away, they carried pieces of you. In their silence, you echoed. In their relationships with others, your absence was noticeable. No one else had your energy. No one else held space the way you did. They may have tried to replicate the connection, but it always fell short. Because what you offered wasn't about words or gestures. It was about essence. It was about the safety that came from your calm. The acceptance that it didn't need proof. The emotional honesty that felt both confronting and healing. That's not something you replace. That's something you come back to. If not in person, then in memory, in regret, in quiet hope. And that's the thing. They come back to you in more ways than one. Maybe not with grand apologies or cinematic declarations, but in moments of softness. In messages sent after months of silence. In questions that hint at reconnection. In the way they listen more, pause longer, open up a little deeper. Those small acts are not random. They're signs of someone who realizes that you were different and is trying in their own way to reconnect with what they lost. You became the one they compare others to. The one that reminds them of what's possible when love isn't about performance, but presence. What they don't always admit is that you scared them not because of what you did, but because of what you represented. You were a mirror of what they deeply wanted but didn't know how to receive. You were safety in a world that told them safety was a lie. You were love in a language they hadn't yet learned to speak. And in being all that, you made them question their own story. You made them wonder if maybe, just maybe, their patterns weren't protecting them, but were keeping them from the very thing they needed. And when someone becomes the exception, they never really leave. Even in absence, their presence stays. Even if they walk away, they carry the weight of what was shared. That's why you're still in their mind. That's why they reach out when you least expect it. That's why they linger. Because when love is real, when someone becomes the exception to every defense you've built, you don't forget them. You can't. And if they return, it's not by accident. It's because somewhere inside them, they've come to realize what you always knew: you weren't just anyone. You were the one. If they return, it's because something in them finally recognized what they couldn't before. You were the place they felt safest, even in the middle of their storm. The chaos they carried within them. The emotional noise, the triggers, the fear of being seen, was not something they ever fully understood, let alone knew how to calm. But in your presence, something settled, maybe not all at once, maybe not visibly, but beneath the layers of defense and distance, a quiet stillness would take hold. That stillness was rare. It wasn't something they were used to, and that's precisely why they ran. Because peace, to someone who has only ever known unpredictability, feels unnerving at first. They didn't leave because you made them feel unsafe. They left because feeling safe was foreign. You weren't the one who caused the chaos. They were already living in it. Inside themselves, you were the quiet voice, the gentle tone, the unspoken understanding that said, you don't have to be anything other than who you are here. And in their world, that kind of acceptance is almost impossible to trust. Avoidants are conditioned to expect love to be conditional. They wait for the shift, the rejection, the betrayal. So when it didn't come, when you continued to offer understanding without pressure, it confused them. It made them question what they knew to be true about love. And questioning those old beliefs, that's terrifying. Because those beliefs have been their only source of safety. They may not have said it out loud, but they felt it. How your presence softened their edges. How your patience gave them breathing room. How your steadiness offered them a rhythm they never knew they needed. It wasn't dramatic or overly intense. It was quiet, grounding, and deeply human. You didn't demand they change, but your presence invited them to. You didn't fix them, but you held space for them to begin healing. And that kind of space, once experienced, can't be forgotten. It becomes a reference point, a memory they carry with them even after they've left. The return is not about sentimentality. It's about recognition. It's about looking back at the spaces they've entered since you and realizing that none of them felt like home. It's about noticing how they couldn't relax, couldn't breathe the same way, couldn't let themselves be fully seen. And then the memory of you resurfaces, not just what you said or did, but how they felt around you. Less tense, less fragmented, more whole. And that feeling, once remembered, creates a longing, a pull, a desire to return, not just to you, but to the version of themselves that only existed with you. People like them don't come back to situations that made them feel weak. They return to places that made them feel human. Places that let them take off the armor without fear of being judged. You may never know how much energy it took for them to come back. You may never see the internal war they fought between pride and regret, between fear and hope. But their reappearance, even if subtle, is not small. It's an act of vulnerability wrapped in hesitation. It's their way of saying, I haven't found what I had with you anywhere else. They come back not expecting everything to be the same, but hoping the safety might still exist. Hoping that you still see them beneath the surface, that even after the silence, the emotional truth still remains. Because deep down, they never wanted to lose you. They just didn't know how to hold you. Loving you required them to hold themselves differently, to face parts of themselves they weren't yet ready to confront. But time changes things, and sometimes the silence they once clung to becomes unbearable. The distance they thought they needed becomes a reminder of what they pushed away. And in that quiet discomfort, they begin to realize it was never about needing space from you. It was about needing space to meet themselves. The journey back is rarely smooth. They may fumble with their words. They may try to feel things out before fully opening up. But behind every hesitant message, every quiet reappearance, there's something deeper, the realization that they felt safest with you. That the chaos they tried to manage alone felt a little lighter in your presence. That while they feared intimacy, they never felt more seen than when they were with you. And that truth grows louder the longer they try to live without it. You weren't perfect, but you were consistent. You weren't always right, but you were real. And real, for someone who has only known performances, is sacred. It's grounding. It's unforgettable. That's why they come back. Because the version of themselves they found with you, the one that wasn't performing, wasn't protecting, wasn't pretending, felt like someone they actually wanted to be. You didn't just give them a relationship. You gave them a glimpse of peace. And for someone built on fear, that peace becomes the most precious thing they didn't know they needed. So when they return, understand this. It's not just about missing you. It's about remembering who they were when they were with you. It's about rediscovering the part of themselves that only existed in your presence, a part they now realize they want to protect, nurture, and hold on to. Because you weren't just someone they loved. You were the safe space where love didn't have to hurt. And that kind of space isn't just remembered. It's sought after. Always.